Ivy and Gecko acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Welcome to Hearts and Minds. Our podcast episodes feature conversations with highly accomplished mining executives and board directors. We'll explore critical themes relating to leadership impact, staff engagement and culture development. So tune in, enjoy the conversations and prepare to be inspired. I'm Alana Bray-White, the Managing Director of Ivy and Gecko, and this is our podcast, Hearts and Minds.
They want to have a bit of elbow room in order to figure out the path forward and not have it told to them. And I think that gives me more bandwidth if I've got people there that can take that type of accountability and bring that sort of capability to the table. And frankly, you'd expect that in an executive. I've always thought, and I've always run businesses, that if you need to have flexibility, then do it.
Our guest today is Brad Rogers, an accomplished executive and company director who has honed his leadership skills across a range of industries, including mining, logistics, engineering, and strategy consulting. Brad was appointed to his current role of Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of ASX-listed Jupiter Mines in August of 2022. Jupiter has a 49.9% ownership stake in the Chippy mine in South Africa, which is a world-class open-pit operation that is recognised as one of the largest and lowest-cost manganese exporters. We've followed Brad's career over the past decade or so, observing his transition from CFO to a CEO. In this episode, he argues that culture is the foundation of a business and must be reinforced before strategy can have its desired impact. He talks about empowerment and the need to give people elbow room to exercise their accountability. And I was interested to learn how Brad goes off script to try and understand a person's character and values. He goes on to discuss the challenges of operating a mine in South Africa and the benefits to be gained from industry consolidation. I hope you enjoy this insightful conversation with Brad Rogers.
Brad, thanks for joining us in the studio today.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
When are you next heading off to South Africa?
Probably in September. I head there every few months or so.
Okay. Busy schedule, and how are things going at the operation?
Yeah, good. It's a great operation.
Yep.
And that's one of the nice things about my job. There's always things you can do to improve operations, but it's been up and running well before I joined. And so, it's one of the best manganese mines in the world.
Yeah.
And steady state, and there's 100 years of mine life ahead of it.
Wow,
So,
what an asset.
yeah, I agree.
Brad, as you know, this podcast is all about leadership and engagement and culture development within mining businesses.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, let's dig a little bit into your backstory. What can you tell us about your early years? Where did you grow up and what was it like there at the time?
Yeah, so I grew up here in Perth, in the southern suburbs of Perth, and I lived in the same house from when I was born until I was past uni. So fairly stable upbringing in that regard. My parents are still married, and so it was a happy childhood in Perth, and two sisters. Just a normal Perth upbringing, and quite stable, as I say, sort of in the same house for 24 years or so.
South of the river, does that mean you possibly went to Wesley College or
I went to Rossmoyne. So
Rossmoyne, great school.
It was a good school.
Yeah. A lot of very high achieving people have come out of that school.
Yeah.
What were your early interests, Brad, and when did you begin to narrow the range of options in terms of a career path for yourself?
Yeah, so early interest as a kid, I was very into swimming, swam competitively, and that was a big focus up until I was wanting to sleep in the mornings, until I was 18 or so and starting to go out to nightclubs. That was 6 days a week and sometimes morning and night. I was also, and still am, very into basketball and started enjoying that when I was probably 13 or 14 and playing competitively there as well. In terms of a career, as you said earlier, I started in consulting for Arthur Andersen and Main Sheet, and that was a great grounding, working across a number of clients, including mining, but a lot of infrastructure development, privatisation advisory type work around Australia and in Asia as well. And I lived for a time in Papua New Guinea, advising the government there and the World Bank on a few engagements. So, so interesting start to the career. I'd always had some interest in mining, and post main sheet, I worked at GRD, which at that time had a big mining engineering business and also had a gold mining business that's now separately listed as Oceana Gold. And so I moved into those roles in that regard. I wanted to move into mining more properly in a focused way at the end of my time at GRD, because I was finding that although that business was involved in mining, I was more involved in the infrastructure development part of that business. And so my career was taking me increasingly away from Perth. I was living in Sydney, I had young kids. And so I kind of made a strategic call that I better put both feet in mining or oil and gas if I wanted to be in Perth, where my family was from and where I'm from, and given young kids were already there and more on the way. And so it was that. But, I remember as a kid, I don't know if they still do it, but used to get the little mineral sets with all of the maps of WA and where all of the projects were. And I was quite into that. So I've always had a fondness for mining, and obviously it's a big part of what we do here. And as a consultant, even, if you want to be based in Perth, that's good to have in the kit bag. So
listening to you, it almost sounds as though you were heading towards becoming a mining engineer or a geologist, perhaps, given your interests in minerals.
Yeah, I think I lack the scientific capability to be to have that sort of career. I've always been much more on the humanities side at school, and I think those are my real strengths now as well. I am a chartered accountant, but I probably wouldn't be able to requalify if I tried. So I've not been really working in that area my entire career, notwithstanding it's my technical qualification. So a lot of admiration for those sorts of people, but I don't think I would have passed.
As you mentioned, during your 30-year career, you've spent time in different locations and in a range of different but nonetheless connected industries. So mining and strategy consulting, engineering, infrastructure services, and then bulk logistics with BIS. How do you compare the value of the experiences that you gained from those different types of environments?
Yeah, it's a good question. My preconditions for a job that I like and want to stay in, or a job that I want to join, isn't actually about the sort of technical application or even the industry. It's more, who are the people that are there? What's the positioning of the business? What's the outlook of the business in terms of its context? And is there an opportunity to grow and have fun? And so whilst there's some similarities there with what I've done, and obviously it's easier to get a job in a new industry or a new job in an industry that you have some capability in. I personally don't think people need to be constrained in that way. And I've thought about opportunities, whether I move on or whether I stay, more in terms of the people that I'm working with, the opportunities that are there to grow and to have fun, and to be able to do that in a sort of in a proprietary manner. And so that's how I think about strategy, but it's also how I think about my own happiness and my own career.
It's an interesting point you raise, and I think doing a business degree and in my case a psychology degree is a good foundation course of education that can spin you off into various industries, perhaps unlike a more specialist degree of law or medicine where you're pretty much locked into a career path. So that's interesting. In your career to date, what would you say is the accomplishment that you were most proud of?
Yeah, so not done yet. Hopefully a few more accomplishments to go. But so far, I would say the time at BIS where I was the CEO, that was a really transformational time for that business. Lots of great people there who I'm still close with today, but a really talented, energetic group. And I think we did some amazing things there, particularly on the innovation front. That business always had good skills in that area, but we really focused, again, to deliver that business a point of difference in its industry. And there were a number of new major inventions that came out of that period of time. But we also did a rebranding, did a lot of work on the culture and communications. Biz was a business with 140 years of history, and so we also, as a team, thought about how do we bring that in. A lot of those people were in client organisations, and we thought Biz could do more in terms of bringing that alumni in and closer, and leveraging them as a point of difference. And so that was an intense period of time. I was also there during COVID, which was stressful in some ways, but interesting period of time to be running a business that spanned so many geographies, that had border controls, and running a big FIFO business, etc. So I would probably say that I think there were lots of goals kicked in that period of time, with an interesting and sometimes challenging backdrop.
I have quite a strong affection for the one-time parent company of Biz in Brambles, of course, and such an iconic and diversified range of businesses. And I'm perhaps showing my age now, but I remember doing some consulting work for Mike Porter, who's a friend of both of us. His dad, when Mike's Porter dad was I think it was Cleanaway or maybe CHEP, one of the Brambles businesses, but such a strong business. And I think, in its era, a very innovative business as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about leadership effectiveness, Brad. Most guests that come onto this program have an opinion that leadership is an art form. It's a set of skills and behaviours that a person can acquire over time, as opposed to an innate quality that people are born with. Do you agree with that? And if you do, tell us about your approach to leadership and how it's evolved and presumably become more effective over time.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what those people think. I think there are things in the toolkit that you can learn and acquire, and I think that's true. I do think there is an innateness there as well that's helpful. I think you have to be willing and want to lead. I think there's a whole group of people that you and I would both know who want to stay in a particular role, and that's fine too, and every business needs them. So I think to be happy as a leader, to be effective as a leader, you have to have energy and be motivated, and I think that's really important. I think if you're going against your innate makeup, and for some people it's not to want to lead and take the risks that are associated with that and do the communication that's required, I think, to be an effective leader. So for those people, I think they'd really be struggling against their innate characteristics. So I think you can learn about strategy, you can put together a good team, but to be an effective leader, I think you need to be a good communicator firstly. And I think whilst you can get better at that through repetition and you can kind of allay the nerves, that you've either got that at some level to be natural at it and therefore to be happy and comfortable in the job ultimately. I'm probably a bit more in really good leaders are probably born and as well as made. You can make a good leader, and it also depends on what level of leadership you're talking about. If you've got a small team, that's different to leading a larger organisation as a CEO.
So perhaps a mix of nature and nurture.
I think so, yeah.
Do you think someone needs to be charismatic in terms of having a dynamic personality style to be effective as a leader?
I think it can help. I don't think it's necessary. I think you need to be authentic. I think you have to be a communicator. Sometimes people would equate charisma with communication. And if someone is a natural communicator, then and charismatic, I can see that being quite effective. I don't think it's necessary. I think it can help.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with that as well. And in my experience, I've observed leaders who I would describe as quite reserved and even flat in terms of their presentation style, but they have credibility nonetheless because they're knowledgeable, they are authentic, and that's a key word that you mentioned there, and transparent, and they have a genuine care for the people under their stewardship within a company. And I think people can see that. I agree. And I've known plenty of those types of effective leaders as well. I do think that type of person takes longer to build that support. So if you're naturally charismatic and can inspire, then that can be a faster way to cut through. But I think
conversely, some of the people like you've mentioned who have built that followership and support and credibility through runs on the board and through deep relationships with people, that can be more powerful than something that's more surface level.
Yeah. Brad, as I ask this next question, I'm mindful of the fact that you're running a business with a mining operation in South Africa, a different jurisdiction and a different culture to what we're used to here in Australia. Some people in positions of authority operate on a command and control basis, a very strict authoritative regime. Is there still merit in this approach with particular workforces in particular parts of the world? Or do you think we should all embrace the trust and empower mantra?
Yeah, so I prefer the trust and empower, and that's how I like to work. That's how I like to be led myself, and that's how I've always sought to lead. So I will say that. I don't think it's as fun, or maybe I'm not as naturally gifted at command and control as others will be.
Yeah.
But I think command and control has its place. And sometimes, as you say, that's a cultural place. I have worked in Indonesia is an example of this, where you've got a certain level of the organisation where people want to be given clear guidance. You don't, have a trucking operation and then tell them to figure out how best to execute the cycle.
Yeah.
And so you do confuse certain cultures and also certain individuals. And I also think industrially, I've worked in engineering organisations where people perceive it as weakness or just want the clarity of what their role is, and I'll go off and do it. So I think command and control has a place. The other place would be turnaround crisis type situations.
Okay. Yep.
I don't think it's the best way to go. I do think if someone like me, for example, who's leading an organisation where there are parts of the organisation that need that, then I need to be self-aware and put in place intermediary management who can effectively lead in that way. I think some of the risks with command and control is that it oversteps. People can feel put upon or worse through those styles, and that's why it's not as fun or I think sustainable to work in that type of environment. But I think short sprints can be effective in a crisis type situation. And then there are certain industries and certain countries or pockets of people where I think you just have to be clear on what's needed and give the people the direction they're looking for.
So you need to take a nuanced situational approach to your leadership style. Yeah. That makes sense. Let's talk about staff engagement. What behavioural competencies do you look for, Brad, when you're selecting a key manager or executive? And do those key qualities vary, again, by jurisdiction or location and industry?
They can vary to some extent. I think the sort of generic ones, you want honesty, transparency, accountability, and that really shouldn't differ. For me also, leading on from the question you just put, I want someone who's going to enjoy working in an environment where, particularly at a senior management level, say someone reporting to me on an executive team, they want to have a bit of elbow room in order to figure out the path forward and not have it told to them. And I think that's gives me more bandwidth if I've got people there that can take that type of accountability and bring that sort of capability to the table. And frankly, you'd expect that in an executive. I think at all levels, though, accountability is really important, and transparency as well, and trust. So those things would be in place regardless, and they're important, particularly in larger cross-border type situations. You're not going to be able to see and hear everything yourself, and so you need people who won't do what I kind of referred to it as failure spectate, see a problem and think it's not my issue.
Yes.
Not be kind of bound by, I've got these lines of demarcation for my accountability, and if that fails, that's someone else's problem. I think that's really important as well. So if you've got those things, I think that's a really good basis for any employee. And then obviously at different levels and different locations, you'll be looking for certain different skill sets. But from a values perspective, it's those things that are important. Yeah.
As an old organisational psychologist, Brad, I've held the view for quite a long time that you don't necessarily need to find the very best people, but you do need to find the best in people. How do you cultivate talent and help people realise their potential? And how do you encourage someone perhaps to choose courage over comfort in terms of stretching themselves to the next level?
Yeah. So I think everyone's different, firstly. So I think it is about understanding the person and, obviously leaving aside, do you believe they've got the skill set to do what you need out of them? That's an entirely separate issue.
Yep.
In terms of motivating optimal performance, it's about understanding actually what they want and how they want to work and what's their longer term career, and finding the intersection of those two things. What do you or what does the business want out of that person, and how can they be motivated in their own way to achieve that? So a lot of people are motivated by financial reward, but actually every time we've done surveys in organisations I've been in, and I think it is pretty common across different organisations, if you look at what motivates people and what causes someone to stay or leave, for example, financial returns in there somewhere, but it's third or fourth. It's mostly who am I working with? Do I understand what's going on? Am I bought into this? And also, can I see what's in that for me? And that's not necessarily about financial reward. It's about what I said before, my own personal conditions. Do I like the people I'm working with? Do I think this place is going somewhere? And can I actually bring something to the table to help that happen? And in some way, that's true of most people. And it's about understanding what that is for those people and finding a way to give that to them if they're successful in the way that you want them to be.
I totally agree. And in our book, Smart Value, when we did some research within the mid-tier mining community last year, we found that by a long stretch, the number one reason why managers left their roles was because of an erosion of trust and respect for their direct manager.
Agree.
So it just really understates the importance of team leaders or team managers doing their very best to become skillful at embracing their people, understanding what makes them tick, what's important to them, and giving them, through collaboration, the ability to enable them to realise more of their potential. When I ask some guests the next question in regards to workplace flexibility, some people say, well, you can't build a team through teams.
Yeah.
It's a nice line, but not everyone agrees. And how do you find, what's your approach to providing workplace and work hours flexibility for corporate office staff? Do you think that you need to have a meeting of the bodies when you've already established a meeting of the minds?
Yeah, so I can see this both ways. I've always been of the view, and ultimately I've worked as a consultant where you'll be sent to somewhere in the world on your own, and this was before mobile phones even, you're off yonder, and you have to make it work in a remote way, and you're not seeing people at that time because people didn't want to pay the bill of flying you often. You're off on your own for months. So you can make it work. I think that there's a lot of soft stuff that's valuable that you miss if you're not together. And I think that is hard to schedule effectively. We've all worked in offices where you've had kind of casual conversations that have lent to something valuable, but even just the relationships within between people. So I've always thought, and I've always run businesses, that if you need to have flexibility, then do it. If you need to work from home, and this was well before COVID, for a given day or even more than that, then fine. But I do like to see that as the exception rather than the rule. I do worry that if the exception is being in the office, then you miss a lot of really valuable stuff for the individuals and growing out of that for the company as well. New hires, joining, miss a lot of that kind of intangible stuff that you get if you're hanging out with the people, getting to know them and how they think and getting their insights into the business. On the other hand, my wife is a lawyer, and she's had to change career 20 or so years ago when we started to have children, because at that time that profession wasn't sufficiently flexible, and so she's had to find good jobs, but ultimately she probably would have liked to have stayed as a lawyer. And so I think we all as businesses miss out on talent if we're too rigid in our thinking. So I do think it's a balance. I'm not one who says, like was the fad, and I think that's really come back post-COVID because people that I talk to anyway are realising the sort of value of having people together on a more regular basis. But I think in Melbourne, for example, that that COVID work from home thing is really being hard to break. People like it, but I'm someone who thinks the majority of time in the office is better and have the flexibility when you need it rather than as the base case.
Yeah, as you say, traffic congestion is one of the factors I think you need to consider. And big cities like Melbourne and Sydney, when I lived in Sydney, it could take me an hour and a half to travel in my car to work, to the office in the CBD, even though I was only 13 or 14 kilometres away. Timing is everything.
Yeah, and I think at Biz, one thing I did reflect on is we had an office in North Sydney that had a lot of head office functions in it, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll. A lot of those people lived in the Blue Mountains or down near Wollongong, and that was a reflection, actually, those sorts of roles that are transactional, can be measured remotely, but asking people like that to take a bus and a train each way every day probably never made sense. And so I think there are certain roles where they can be effective on a mostly remote basis, but as a general rule, I think it's mostly in person and exception if you need flexibility.
Brad, how do you pitch Jupiter's value proposition to staff? Is the proposition fluid depending on who you're seeking to influence? So how do you differentiate your brand to others in the industry that are in pursuit of the same talented people?
Yeah, so it is going to be different depending on what the person's role is and what they're looking for and level of the role. But I think everyone who works at Jupiter or who might look to work at Jupiter in the future, or any organisation, frankly, wants to join a company where the people are good, the prospects are good, what I said before. And so the value proposition for Jupiter is we've got this great long life asset, no debt at the mine, no debt at Jupiter, more than 100 years of mine life remaining. It's been up and running for the last 10 years. It's one of the most cost-efficient mines in the world of manganese, and manganese has a very exciting outlook in terms of the positioning of that mine and also other mines around it. And so, limited downside, exciting upside in summary. And also then you get into the specific strategy around how we're going to grow this business together and what role those individuals can play in that.
Good.
And now we take a short break to acknowledge our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Halo Civil Engineering. Halo is a multidiscipline civil contractor that specialises in the delivery of complex civil projects across defence, infrastructure, energy and resources. A West Australian company committed to delivering dynamic solutions with a focus on zero harm, while having a positive impact on their industry, clients and the people they serve. For more information, search for Halo Civil Engineering on socials or visit halocivil.com. If you'd like to inquire about sponsoring an episode of Hearts and Minds, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or via email info@ivyandgecko.com.au. Ivy and Gecko is a leading Australian talent and organisational consulting firm. We specialise in providing executive search and board consulting services to ASX small and mid-tier explorers, developers and producers in the gold and critical minerals industries. As the only executive search and leadership consulting firm to be admitted membership of the Minerals Council of Australia, Ivy and Gecko is uniquely resourced to advocate for the interests of our exploration, project development and mining clients.
Culture or strategy, which comes first, do you think?
So I think culture has to come first, and culture, you can influence it, you can build it. Ultimately, strategies can change over time and should change over time, is my view. And strategy is something that should be getting tweaked every year based on context and how we're going. Is things that we imagined when we set this strategy still true or not, and can we change it? Whereas culture, ideally, you are not going through those cycles. You're forming a base culture of the sorts of capabilities you think you need, but also a productive working environment, and you're building the people around that. And then it's those people who will come up with the strategy, which ideally you get right and you nail, and it's 5 to 10 years. And but realistically, you're going to have changes in strategy if people are there long enough. And culture should be enduring and form the basis for good strategy setting and execution.
And what does a strong, healthy culture look like for a mining business like Jupiter?
Yeah, well, for any mining business, I think you need to have the things that I spoke about before. You kind of obviously are going to get measured on your accountability and performance. I think license to operate, if you look at any sort of global mining survey at the moment, is top of mind. And that's really, historically, that's been a lot to do with safety. Make sure that you are not injuring people and therefore, putting those people at risk and making yourself an unattractive place to work, but also putting a mining license at risk. And now you are moving into other things. So it's not just about production and financial results. It's also about the way that you are growing and conducting your business. And so I think ultimately the generic cultural identifiers we talked about before are the important ones: accountability as to delivery, transparency as to problems and opportunities, and trust with all stakeholders are what you're looking to deliver. I don't think necessarily they're different depending on the business you have. I think mining has some particular risks and opportunities to it, but when you boil it all down to a cultural level, that's what you're looking to have in place.
And who do you think is responsible for improving the culture of a business? Is it at all levels, board, executive, line workforce?
It is at all levels, and I do think it needs to start at the board. Ultimately, you can have problems and opportunities with the executive team. So leaving it up to the executive team alone and even the CEO is not the right answer. I do think our board, for example, is all non-executive at Jupiter, and so it's unreasonable to expect them to do too much heavy lifting. It is about actually the team coming together and then having a sign-off and alignment with the board. But then the board needs to monitor that over time to make sure that the business and its executive is actually executing and aligned with those agreed values, as well as the strategy. So it has to be end to end, and it actually has to be kind of lived and real. I think a lot of the value setting and cultural talk is name checking, and that's where people get jaundiced and cynical that these are just words, and that's where those sorts of efforts can actually go awry. I think people actively switch off and they don't believe you. So it needs to have the involvement of people down to low levels within the organisation to ensure that it is real and that they were part of setting strategy and culture and feel ownership of it. But the board then also needs to have involvement and monitoring on an ongoing basis.
It's always a balancing act, isn't it? The board doesn't want to intervene to the extent that it interferes with the day-to-day operational management of the business, because that's the role of the executive. But at the same time, you're right, it's got to be alert and mindful of possible derailers to the culture of the business that could impact very significantly on its operational safety or profitability.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hardest jobs for boards, because to the extent that they're not executives, they are relying on intuition and experience on a part-time basis to be able to make those conviction calls based on what they're seeing. And sometimes that's not always easy. And sometimes even if you have that conviction, it's hard to make the call, because you might have someone or a team that are performing well in terms of their outcomes. But ultimately, if they're not displaying the right values and behaviours, my view is that's going to come unstuck at some point in time. So I think that's one of the harder jobs of the board, but that's one of the more important reasons they're there.
Yeah, indeed. We agree on the importance of a values-based culture. How do you hire for values? In other words, how do you verify or validate that the person in front of you is made of the right stuff from a values point of view?
Yeah, I mean, that is also in part about intuition and experience, I think, David, and you know more about these things than me, probably, given your career. But for me, it is in part about being unstructured to some extent. You're kind of not running through the list, which most people anticipate questions in an interview, but trying to, talk off script and trying to see how people are. References, I like informal references, people that I know, and in Perth that's kind of easier than in some other places. There's not many degrees of separation.
Yes.
And I think those informal references can be, that you haven't had names given to you that you do check, and I think that's fine for people to do that on me as well. I think that's a good way of building trust and validation.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's not a perfect science. You can get it wrong, and what I try to do in those as well is to say, not just try and judge that person's character, but talk clearly about my expectations and ways of working. And so, for example, what I said before around wanting to have direct reports to me, at least people who are prepared to work on an accountable basis. We talk about what the goal is. Off you go. Come back if you've got any problems. Come back if you want to agree approach. But I'm not going to tell you how to get from A to B, because that's not how I work, and I don't think that's a fun way for my reports to work. I try and share some of that. So then if we get into a situation that's not working, at least I've been clear on what my expectations are. And there are some then assumed accountability on the behalf of the other person to try and make it work. And if it can't, we've all been clear with each other. So, yeah, it's not a perfect science. I think it is about kind of being humanistic rather than kind of rote in interviews, and trying to de-risk as much as possible.
I agree. And one thing I like to do when I'm considering a candidate and the worthiness of that candidate to present to my client is get the individual in a more relaxed setting. Perhaps so they can let their guard down a bit and you can observe the true person.
Yep.
So having even a cup of coffee at a cafe or over lunch, having a discussion with a candidate, watching how they interact with wait staff.
Yep.
Do they acknowledge the waiter or waitress when they deliver the coffee, and do they make eye contact and say thank you? Now, these may seem small things, but to me, it's an indication of courtesy, professional courtesy. And there is something in that when it comes to building relationships and earning the trust and respect of people. So common courtesies like that, I'm always alert to when I'm dealing with a candidate.
Yeah.
As unscientific as that may be, I think, it's just part of the wisdom of, observing people over many years and how they interact with others. It's a challenging environment, Brad, for many mining companies, especially the smaller ones who are perhaps not in production yet. What are some of the biggest challenges facing the mining industry in your place of operation in South Africa, and how does that compare with conditions in Australia?
Good question. I think there are lots of common challenges and opportunities, which I won't go into since that's not the question. I think the challenges in South Africa and questions that I get from investors outside of South Africa, power is one of them, as in the supply of electricity. That is constrained in South Africa, and that's fairly well known. Our mine, fortunately, has its own power station, so it's connected to the grid, but it also is self-reliant if it needs to be. Bulk infrastructure, rail and port, that's also constrained. And in manganese, it's capacity constrained. So the system operates fine from a rail perspective, but we all wish there was more of it, and therefore we're road hauling. So those are specific challenges. I think questions around the political outlook in South Africa I often get as well. So those are the sorts of specific questions about South Africa. And then there's plenty of common things that miners anywhere need to deal with: license to operate, getting the bargain right with your local communities, which I think is important. And if it swings too far either way, you've got problems one way or another. So those are common issues in South Africa and here. As you say, fortunately, our business is producing and is is successful and established. So a lot of the issues you might have through the cycle where you're not operating and need to raise capital to survive, Jupiter's never had to raise capital. And so we're in a bit of a privileged position in that regard.
In Australia, at least, we're seeing a lot of consolidation in the mining sector, particularly amongst the gold players, as companies seek to build their value through merger and acquisition. What's your take on this trend, and what do you think the manganese industry landscape will look like some years out from now?
Yeah, so in general, I think consolidation is a good thing, and our strategy is to consolidate in and around the area that our existing investment is in. And There are, depending on which mineral you're talking about, and they've all got their own specific circumstances, there are different reasons why you might want to do that. In the case of our mine in the Kalahari manganese field, you've got 73% of the world's manganese reserves in a 32-kilometre stretch of land in South Africa.
It's highly concentrated.
Highly concentrated. And these mines, you've got 5 of the top 10 producing manganese mines today in that 32-kilometre stretch of land, all of the top remaining mine lives in that area, and a lot of operating businesses as well. Close enough that there are synergies around logistics in particular, which I mentioned as constrained, but also around geology, around management. And so in that particular instance, consolidation makes a great deal of sense because you could lower the cost and increase the margins and lower risks as well through combinations of existing mines. In certain commodities, and manganese is an example of this, you've got quite a fragmented supply side. So whilst you've got a lot of the world's important manganese mines there, the ownership is fragmented. Okay. And so through the cycle, a lot of people talk about supplier discipline. Prices are down. People should be reducing production in order to get to a more sustainable level of pricing. Obviously, if you've got a lot of fragmentation, that's a difficult or impossible thing to do. And so you tend to maybe prolong down cycles there. And so I think you get to a certain level of scale there where you can actually bring leadership and stability to a commodity market that might otherwise not have that. So there are lots of reasons why I think consolidation in mining is necessary, is a good thing, and is going to happen. And that's true of lots of commodities. And I think lithium is one of those battery markets, and that's part of our strategy as well, is to take byproduct from chippy and upgrade it to battery-grade manganese. Okay. That end market we have a strong belief in, but it's some years away. So you've got minerals like lithium, which are really kind of storming and forming their industry ahead of real economic scale of demand being established on a maintainable basis. And so I think some of those industries, and I'd put battery-grade manganese in that category as well, have to go through a growth and norming phase, and consolidation is a natural part of that.
Do you see Jupiter going down the midstream, downstream processing journey to create more battery-ready materials for the electrification industry?
We do. So our strategy is to take low-grade, what we call low-grade manganese ore, 30 to 32% material that we produce as a byproduct at Chippy already in large volumes. Yep. You can sell that material into the steel market when prices are high. When prices are where they are now, you can't. But that material is very suitable to convert into battery-grade manganese, which is that same sort of head-grade level of manganese. So that's a strategy that we have because we think that market is real, but also because we think we can vend some proprietary advantage into establishing in that market. But that will involve building a plant that will take ore and make battery-grade manganese out of it, what's called high-purity manganese sulfate monohydrate. That plant will be somewhere in the world. Base case is the USA. Jupiter would be an investor in that plant alongside other investors. And so we do see that is an add-on part of our business that we're looking to focus on as a strategy. Again, the market is 2028 or beyond. It's some time away, but there's preparatory work that needs to be done now in order to study that market and be ready to act so that you can supply that market when the demand really starts to pick up.
So the Jupiter journey is far from finished. It's continuing innovation and development as time goes by.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's do some rapid fire questions. Brad, are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
When you think about exemplars of great leadership, people deceased or living, who is the person that you most admire and why?
Good question. I could come up with lots, and it probably won't be rapid fire if I did that. I do like, to be honest, charismatic leaders, going against what I said before. I can see the value in the strong, silent types as well, but I tend to gravitate towards political leaders as well. They're very visible. I think Barack Obama has a mixed response, but I thought he was very inspirational. I thought he had a vision. Paul Keating in his day as well. He's very much got a mixed audience now and what they'd say about him, but he had the courage of conviction. So
Yes.
both of those guys aren't necessarily on the same side of politics as me, but in terms of human leadership, of courage of conviction, I think in politics there's not enough of that, and people want to see that. Whether or not you agree with the individual policy, having leaders who are in it for the betterment of their group, whatever that is, and are prepared to say, I believe in this, and I'm going to be accountable in communicating and executing. That's what I admire.
Yeah. We share political people that we admire in Keating and Obama, and it occurs to me when you contrast the delivery of their message in Parliament or in public with the likes of Trump or Biden, it's chalk and cheese, isn't it? It just makes you so disappointed that a country like America, with its population and its history, can't produce better quality, charismatic people with an intellect.
And I think what you see all around the world and what's disappointing and leading to frustration, I think polarization in politics, which is actually dangerous, is the centre of the road, left and right, are both showing, and it's been the case for the last 15, 20 years, even in Australia, they're in politics to be in politics. They're too safe. They're wanting to play back to the audience what they think they want to hear. And ultimately, that's not what people want to hear. You can, there were lots of things that Howard did that I didn't like, but you respect because he took them to the populace at the election, who was prepared to be defeated if he didn't have accountability to deliver. But then if he's got a mandate, he's going to do what he said. So that's the sort of thing I think people are crying out for. And I think in frustration of not having that through the major parties and centrist leaders, you've got people skewing to the left and right at the moment.
I agree. And I think the power of social media to further alienate people by reinforcing their particular point of view has made the problem worse.
And dangerous.
Brad, what's your favourite movie of all time? This is meant to be rapid fire, Brad.
I'm going to say Shawshank. That'll be everyone's response. My son, who's in year 10 at the moment, watched
it's a brutal
last
movie,
week.
isn't it?
It is brutal. It's brilliant, and I didn't realise until fairly recently, written by Stephen King. I think you would find, and I've seen this question put to lots of different people, and that's the standard answer. And I probably could have a better one if I was prepared. That is a great one.
What have you changed your mind about recently?
Yeah, it's a good one, and I can't answer it. And I think people should be open to changing their minds and listening properly. And
that's fair enough.
It's something that I need to be self-aware of because I do tend to have firm views on things.
What's the best career or business advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
So not so much advice necessarily, but I grew up watching my dad, who had he worked in a pharmacy. He was a pharmacist and quite late in life, sort of mid-40s, bought his own pharmacy and then grew that business and bought a wholesale pharmaceutical company and created a new business model servicing nursing homes and hospitals here in Perth. And he, by his own admission, was too cautious, waited too long, not sure what risks he was afraid of as to why he didn't do that before. But in terms of someone who led people well, who had a very firm customer focus. I worked for him when I was at university delivering pharmaceuticals to hospitals, and I would drive a box of Panadol sometimes from his pharmacy in East Fremantle to some little old lady in Joondalup at no cost because that person moved from East Freo to Joondalup and he didn't want to let people down. And you look at that from a business perspective, and he was taking a loss by doing that. But I do think that sort of approach of putting people first, and in particularly if you're in a service organisation, putting customers first and really being true to that does pay back. So he's someone I think in terms of my own values, I'm probably similar to, or hope I am in some of those ways, and that's formed my view of how you do business and how you treat people and how you lead people, and ultimately it's kind of taking a people first point of view. And if you get those things right and you surround yourself with good people and you treat customers well, then they'll take care of you even when no one's watching. I think that's important if you want to have an enduring career or business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a beautiful story about your dad, and no doubt his legacy lives on in you and the way that you conduct your business and your relationships with people. What activity bores you the most?
Yeah, so I'm an accountant, and I can't imagine myself ever being a proper accountant. I never have been. I kind of did it as a means to an end. I knew when I was doing it that this stuff's boring and I don't want to be doing that. And actually, I've had to be pretty self-aware. I was a CFO of Biz for quite a long time, but when the board of that business asked me to take that role on, I said, if you want a proper accountant, I'm not it. And actually, there was fortunately a very good one there who agreed to take on the group financial controller role.
Yeah.
So that sort of repeating work, that is what some people love. I can't stand, and I've never been someone who's disciplined enough to force myself to do things for a long time that I'm not good at, and so I try to play to my strengths.
Yeah. The other side of the coin is what excites you the most?
Change, opportunity, growth. I try and find myself in situations where those things are there if you get after it with the right people. There are some people, and I've worked through periods of time in different businesses, and sometimes this is unavoidable and necessary, and you need to see it through. That's the other side of the spectrum: turnaround, risk, negative change mitigation. I don't want to put myself in situations like that for long periods of time because I don't enjoy it. And I think if you're not enjoying yourself, you're not delivering full value. Particularly as a CEO, I'm very aware that you have to be aware of your own energy level and bring that to work. And so whilst it's also self-serving, I think if you're in a place, a business with a group of people where you are a fit and you're getting something out of it yourself, then it's naturally going to flow that you're inspiring other people to do well and enjoy themselves as well.
So certainly the entrepreneurial spirit is within you.
Yeah.
And you told the story about your dad, and is your dad still with us?
He is, yeah.
I'm sure he's very proud of what you've done, because you are seemingly different people in your approach.
Yeah.
But, his qualities have shined through in a different form within you. Final question, Brad. If you walked out of this studio today and you walked into a world as it will exist in the year 2054, so in other words, 30 years from now, what do you think would strike you as the most significant difference in the way people go about their lives?
Yeah, so I think the obvious one is from a technology point of view. I do think that automation and AI is going to be ever encroaching into what we do, and I think areas in terms of people's careers that they thought AI wasn't going to perform a role creatively, for example, songs, already creating pretty believable songs, deep fakes, etc. So I think that hopefully by then we've worked out how to make the best of it and how to ensure it enhances quality of life for us, rather than what we are right now is leading, I think, a bit of a haphazard approach to that. And there's all sorts of areas where I think society has to decide for itself what role we want it to play there. But inevitably, there's going to be a greater level of robotic assistance in our life, whether we want it or not. I don't think that in the end of the day, you're going to get past this sort of human interaction, and people are people and they want that. And so there's always going to be a place for these sorts of things, but I do suspect that the way that we live our lives is going to be quite different looking that far out. And there's technology around right now which will be implemented much sooner than that. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, the genie is out of the bottle to some extent, isn't it? And we've just got to learn and decide how to control it and not lose the humanity of being human beings. And I think there is a risk if the extremists take it to its ultimate conclusion that we'll be robots ourselves. And, it's to some extent a frightening scenario, but we'll see. Brad, it's been a delight to talk with you. Thank you. I've learned a bit about you as a person and your leadership style, and continued good luck with your operation in South Africa, and all the best to you and your team.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to Hearts and Minds. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a rating or share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow us and connect on social media for updates on all of our upcoming guests. I'm Alana Bray-White, and I look forward to you joining us for our next episode.